Dean Martin walked out of the federal courthouse in Las Vegas on March 15, 1975, knowing that he had just signed his own death warrant. For 3 hours, he had sat in the witness stand and told a federal jury everything he knew about organized crime's infiltration into the Las Vegas entertainment industry. He had named names, described criminal activities, and provided testimony that would send some of the most dangerous men in America to prison for the rest of their lives. But as Dean climbed into the back seat of an unmarked federal car, he had no idea that he was about to disappear from public view for 6 months, living under an assumed identity, while the most powerful crime families in the country put a price on his head. The subpoena. The trouble had started 6 months earlier, in September 1974, when 2 FBI agents knocked on the door of Dean's Beverly Hills home at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Agent Robert Hayes, whom Dean recognized from previous encounters during his confrontation with the Nixon administration, was accompanied by a younger agent named Patricia Morrison. Both agents looked unusually serious, even by FBI standards. "Mr. Martin," Agent Hayes said, "we need to discuss your knowledge of certain individuals and activities related to organized crime operations in Las Vegas." Dean invited them in, already understanding that this wasn't a request. It was the beginning of a process that would fundamentally change his life. "What individuals and what activities are you referring to?" Dean asked. Agent Morrison opened a briefcase and removed a thick folder filled with photographs, documents, and surveillance reports. "Mr. Martin, for the past 18 months, the FBI has been conducting an investigation into money laundering, illegal gambling, and racketeering activities centered in Las Vegas. This investigation, codenamed Operation Spotlight, has revealed extensive criminal enterprises operating through legitimate entertainment businesses." She spread several photographs across Dean's coffee table, showing him with various individuals at Las Vegas venues, Hollywood parties, and private gatherings. "We have evidence that you have had contact with several individuals who are targets of this investigation. We need to understand the nature of those contacts and any information you may have about their activities." Dean studied the photographs. Some showed him with casino owners who he had always suspected had questionable backgrounds. Others showed him at parties with people he barely knew. A few showed him in professional settings with individuals he had worked with for years without suspecting any criminal involvement. But one photograph made Dean's blood run cold. The picture showed Dean shaking hands with Vincent "Vinny" Castellano, a man Dean knew as a successful businessman who had occasionally attended his Las Vegas performances. What Dean didn't know until that moment was that Castellano was actually the underboss of the most powerful crime family on the West Coast. "Mr. Martin," Agent Hayes said, "we're not suggesting that you were involved in any criminal activities, but we believe you may have witnessed or overheard things that could be crucial to our investigation." Dean realized that his years of performing in Las Vegas had made him an unwitting witness to organized crime operations. Over the next 2 hours, the FBI agents questioned Dean about dozens of individuals, events, and conversations from his Las Vegas career. They showed him surveillance photographs, played him audio recordings, and asked him to identify people and places that had been part of his professional life for over a decade. What emerged was a disturbing picture of how thoroughly organized crime had infiltrated the Las Vegas entertainment industry. Casino owners who Dean had considered legitimate businessmen were revealed to be money launderers for drug trafficking operations. Booking agents who had arranged his performances were actually front men for illegal gambling enterprises. Even some of his fellow entertainers had unknowingly been used to provide cover for criminal activities. Most shocking of all, Dean learned that several of his own business associates had been secretly working with organized crime figures. "Mr. Martin," Agent Morrison said as the interview concluded, "we're going to need you to testify before a federal grand jury about these matters." Dean understood immediately that testifying against organized crime figures would put him in mortal danger. These were not people who forgot about witnesses or forgave testimony that sent them to prison. "Agent Morrison, if I testify against these people, they're going to try to kill me. Mr. Martin, we understand the risks involved. The federal government has programs in place to protect witnesses who cooperate with law enforcement investigations." Dean had heard of witness protection programs, but he had never imagined that he might need one himself. "What exactly does that mean?" It means that if your testimony helps convict these individuals, and if there are credible threats against your safety, we can provide you with a new identity and relocate you until the danger passes. Dean Martin, one of the most recognizable entertainers in the world, was being offered the chance to disappear entirely. The grand jury. The federal grand jury met in a secure courthouse in downtown Las Vegas, in a room that had been swept for electronic surveillance devices and was guarded by armed federal marshals. Dean had never seen security like this outside of government buildings in Washington, D.C. On November 12, 1974, Dean Martin was sworn in as a witness before 23 federal grand jurors who would decide whether there was sufficient evidence to bring criminal charges against the organized crime figures under investigation. For the next 4 hours, Dean told the grand jury everything he could remember about his interactions with individuals who were now revealed to be major criminals. He described conversations he had overheard at Las Vegas parties, where casino owners discussed skimming profits to avoid paying taxes. He recalled backstage encounters where booking agents had made references to family business that he now understood referred to organized crime activities. Most damaging to the defendants, Dean testified about a private dinner party he had attended in 1972, where Vincent Castellano had openly discussed using casino revenues to fund drug trafficking operations. He was talking about moving money from Las Vegas to Miami to purchase cocaine, then bringing the drugs back to sell in California. Dean told the grand jury, "At the time, I thought he was joking or trying to impress people with tough talk. I now understand that he was describing actual criminal operations." Dean's testimony was corroborated by FBI surveillance records, financial documents, and testimony from other witnesses. The evidence was overwhelming. On December 18, 1974, the federal grand jury issued indictments against 17 individuals, including Vincent Castellano, on charges ranging from racketeering to drug trafficking to tax evasion. The indictments made national headlines. The Las Vegas organized crime investigation was described as the largest federal prosecution of casino-related criminal activity in American history. Dean Martin's name appeared in news coverage as a key witness whose testimony was crucial to the government's case. Within 24 hours of the indictments being announced, Dean began receiving death threats. The first threat came in the form of a phone call to Dean's Beverly Hills home on the evening of December 18th, just hours after the federal indictments were announced on television news. Dean answered the phone expecting a call from his manager about upcoming performance schedules. Instead, he heard a voice he didn't recognize speaking in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. "Mr. Martin, you made a big mistake testifying against Mr. Castellano and his associates. Big mistakes have consequences." "Who is this?" "Someone who knows where you live, where your children live, and where you'll be performing next month in Las Vegas. Unless you find a way to change your testimony, you're going to have accidents. So are the people you care about." The line went dead. Dean immediately called the FBI. Agent Hayes arrived at Dean's home within 30 minutes, accompanied by a technical team that swept the house for surveillance devices and installed enhanced security systems. "Mr. Martin, we expected this kind of retaliation. These people don't make idle threats. When they say they're going to hurt you, they mean it. What are my options? You can withdraw your testimony and refuse to cooperate further with the prosecution. That would probably end the threats, but it would also allow these criminals to avoid conviction. Or you can continue to cooperate with the prosecution, testify at trial, and accept federal protection until the cases are resolved and the threat level decreases." Dean understood that he was facing a choice between his personal safety and his civic responsibility to help prosecute dangerous criminals. That night, someone threw a Molotov cocktail at Dean's Beverly Hills home. The incendiary device shattered a front window and started a fire that was quickly extinguished by the Los Angeles Fire Department. No one was injured, but the message was clear. The threats were escalating to actual attacks. FBI agents who had been conducting surveillance of Dean's home arrested the arsonist, a known associate of Vincent Castellano's organization. Under interrogation, the man admitted that he had been hired to send a message to Dean about the consequences of cooperating with federal law enforcement. Agent Hayes called Dean the next morning with an urgent message. "Mr. Martin, we've intercepted communications indicating that there's a contract on your life. Multiple individuals have been hired to kill you before the trial begins." How multiple? At least 3 separate assassination teams, each operating independently so that if one fails, the others can still complete the mission. Dean felt his stomach drop. He was facing not just random violence, but a coordinated campaign by professional killers. Agent Hayes, what exactly does federal protection involve? "Mr. Martin, we're talking about complete identity change and relocation until this threat is neutralized." The disappearance. On March 16, 1975, the day after Dean's testimony concluded, he walked out of his Beverly Hills home, carrying a single suitcase, and climbed into an unmarked federal car. He would not return to that house or to his public identity as Dean Martin for 6 months. The Federal Witness Protection Program in 1975 was a relatively new concept, designed to hide witnesses whose testimony was crucial to prosecuting organized crime cases. Dean was driven to a safe house in a Los Angeles suburb, where he met with Deputy U.S. Marshal Sarah Rodriguez, who would be responsible for his security and his transformation into a new identity. "Mr. Martin, or rather, Mr. Davidson, which is your new name, you need to understand that for the next several months, Dean Martin cannot exist. No contact with family members, no contact with business associates, no public appearances of any kind." Dean looked at the identification documents that had been prepared for him. Name David Davidson. Occupation, insurance salesman. Address apartment 47, Sunset Gardens, Phoenix, Arizona. Marshal Rodriguez, I'm supposed to be performing in Las Vegas next month. I have television appearances scheduled. I have recording sessions planned. Mr. Davidson, all of that is being handled. Your manager has been told that you're suffering from exhaustion and need to take a medical leave of absence. The cover story is that you're in a private clinic receiving treatment for stress-related health problems. Dean realized that his entire public life was being put on hold while he lived as a stranger to himself. The next morning, Dean Martin disappeared from public view. Federal marshals drove him to Phoenix, Arizona, where he was installed in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a middle-class suburb under the identity of Davidson. For the first time in 25 years, Dean Martin was anonymous. Life underground. Living as David Davidson in Phoenix, Arizona, was the strangest experience of Dean's life. He woke up each morning in an apartment that looked nothing like any place he had ever lived. Instead of custom-tailored suits, he wore off-the-rack clothes purchased at local department stores. Instead of expensive restaurants and exclusive clubs, he ate at neighborhood diners and watched television in his small living room. Most surreal of all, nobody recognized him. The Witness Protection Program had provided Dean with a complete background story for his new identity. David Davidson was a 58-year-old insurance salesman from Minneapolis who had moved to Phoenix for health reasons. He had modest savings, drove a used Ford sedan, and lived quietly without attracting attention. To maintain his cover, Dean had to actually work as an insurance salesman. Marshal Rodriguez had arranged for him to be employed by a local insurance agency, where he spent his days selling life insurance policies to Phoenix residents who had no idea they were dealing with one of the most famous entertainers in America. The key to successful witness protection, Marshal Rodriguez explained, is complete immersion in your new identity. You can't just pretend to be David Davidson. You have to actually become David Davidson. Dean found the work surprisingly engaging. Selling insurance required many of the same skills he used as a performer. Reading people, understanding their needs, building trust, and persuading them to make decisions. The difference was that instead of entertaining audiences, he was helping families protect themselves financially. But the isolation was devastating. Dean had not realized how much of his identity was tied to his career and his public recognition. Stripped of his fame, his wealth, and his professional relationships, he had to confront questions about who he really was beneath the celebrity persona. He wrote in a journal that Marshal Rodriguez had encouraged him to keep. Day 23 as David Davidson, sold 3 life insurance policies today. Strange to think that I used to perform for thousands of people, and now I spend my days in one-on-one conversations with people who will never know who I really am. Is this more or less real than my life as Dean Martin? The hardest part was the complete cutoff from his family. Dean could not contact his children, his ex-wives, or any of his friends. Marshall Rodriguez monitored all communications, and any attempt to reach out to his previous life would have compromised his safety and the safety of people he cared about. He wrote, Day 45. Saw a man at the grocery store who looked like my son, Dean Paul. For a moment, I almost called out to him, realized that I don't know how my children are doing, whether they're worried about me or if they believe the cover story about my medical leave. This is the price of testifying against criminals. You lose your family to save your life. But Dean also discovered aspects of normal life that he had forgotten during his decades of fame. He developed relationships with neighbors who knew nothing about his celebrity background. He joined a local bowling league, where he was appreciated for his sense of humor rather than his professional accomplishments. He volunteered at a senior center, helping elderly residents with insurance questions. He wrote, Day 78. Mrs. Patterson, the 82-year-old woman in apartment 23, brought me homemade cookies today. She said I was the kindest insurance salesman she had ever met. When was the last time someone appreciated me for something other than my ability to sing or tell jokes? This anonymous life has its own rewards. The trial. While Dean Martin lived anonymously in Phoenix as David Davidson, the federal trial of Vincent Castellano and his associates proceeded in Las Vegas. Dean followed the proceedings through carefully filtered news reports that Marshall Rodriguez provided, but he was frustrated by his inability to be directly involved in the prosecution. The trial was a media sensation. Prosecutors presented evidence of a massive criminal enterprise that had used Las Vegas casinos to launder money from drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and extortion operations. The government's case relied heavily on financial records, surveillance footage, and wiretapped conversations that revealed the scope of organized crime's infiltration into legitimate businesses. But the prosecution's most powerful evidence was the testimony that Dean Martin had provided to the grand jury. Prosecutors read portions of Dean's testimony into the trial record, describing his eyewitness accounts of criminal conversations and activities. Defense attorneys argued that Dean's testimony was unreliable because he was not present at the trial to be cross-examined. But federal rules allowed grand jury testimony to be introduced as evidence. Vincent Castellano's defense team hired private investigators to locate Dean Martin and force him to testify in person. The investigators discovered that Dean had supposedly been receiving medical treatment at an undisclosed location, but they were unable to determine where he was actually staying. Several times, the defense attorneys petitioned the court to require Dean's personal appearance, but prosecutors successfully argued that his safety would be compromised. Meanwhile, in Phoenix, Dean was growing increasingly restless. Day 112. Read in the newspaper that Castellano's lawyers are claiming I'm hiding because my testimony was false. Part of me wants to walk into that courtroom and tell them exactly what I saw and heard, but Marshall Rodriguez says that would be suicide. Literally. The trial lasted for 6 weeks, with testimony from over 40 witnesses. FBI agents described their surveillance operations. Financial experts explained how casino revenues had been diverted to fund criminal activities. Former associates of the defendants testified about the organization's violent methods for dealing with rivals and witnesses. On August 15, 1975, after deliberating for 3 days, the jury returned guilty verdicts on virtually all charges. Vincent Castellano was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His associates received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years. The criminal enterprise that had operated in Las Vegas for over a decade was completely dismantled. But the convictions also meant that Dean Martin was now a target for revenge by surviving members of the organization and their allies in other crime families. Marshall Rodriguez informed Dean that the threat level against him had actually increased following the convictions. Mr. Davidson, these people view you as the primary reason for the destruction of their operation. The fact that their leaders are now in prison doesn't eliminate the danger. It increases it. How long will I have to stay in witness protection? Mr. Davidson, that depends on how long it takes for the threat to diminish. It could be months, or it could be years. Dean realized that his decision to testify against organized crime might have permanently ended his career as Dean Martin. The return. The breakthrough came in September 1975. 6 months after Dean had entered witness protection, federal agents arrested the last 3 members of the assassination teams that had been hired to kill Dean Martin. The arrests were the result of an FBI sting operation that had been designed to identify and neutralize the remaining threats against Dean's life. Federal agents had posed as intermediaries offering to provide information about Dean's location, then arrested the would-be assassins when they attempted to make contact. Marshal Rodriguez called Dean with the news he had been hoping to hear for 6 months. "Mr. Davidson, we believe the immediate threat against your life has been neutralized. You can begin the process of returning to your previous identity." Dean felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. After 6 months of living as David Davidson, the prospect of resuming his life as Dean Martin seemed both thrilling and terrifying. What does that process involve? Gradually reintroducing you to your previous life, while maintaining security precautions. You can contact your family and business associates, but you'll need to be cautious about your movements and activities for the foreseeable future. Dean's first phone call was to his manager, Mickey Rudin. "Mickey, it's Dean." There was silence on the other end of the line for several seconds. "Dean? Jesus Christ. Where have you been? We've been told you were in some kind of medical facility, but nobody would tell us where or what was wrong with you." "I've been in witness protection, Mickey. I testified against organized crime figures, and the government had to hide me to keep me alive." "Witness protection? Dean, what the hell have you gotten involved in?" Dean spent the next hour explaining to Mickey everything that had happened: the FBI investigation, the grand jury testimony, the trial, and his 6 months as David Davidson. Mickey was stunned. "Dean, do you realize that your career has been on hold for 6 months? We've had to cancel dozens of performances, turn down movie roles, postpone recording sessions. People in the industry are wondering if you're ever coming back." "Mickey, I'm coming back, but I need to do it carefully." Dean's return to public life was gradual and heavily security conscious. His first performance after leaving witness protection was a private concert at a small venue in Los Angeles, with extensive security provided by federal marshals and private guards. The audience that night included many of Dean's longtime friends and colleagues who had not seen him for 6 months. Frank Sinatra was in the front row, along with Sammy Davis Jr. and several other members of Dean's inner circle. When Dean walked onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause that lasted for several minutes. "Thank you," Dean said, when the applause finally subsided. "I know there have been a lot of questions about where I've been and what I've been doing. All I can tell you is that sometimes being a good American citizen requires sacrifices that you never expected to make." Dean's performance that night was different from his previous concerts. There was a depth and seriousness to his presentation that reflected his experiences during the previous 6 months. He sang songs about courage, justice, and the price of doing the right thing. Instead of his usual casual banter with the audience, Dean spoke about the importance of standing up to corruption and the responsibility that citizens have to support law enforcement when it investigates criminal activities. 6 months ago, I made a decision to tell the truth about some things I had witnessed," Dean said. "That decision cost me my career, my privacy, and my identity for half a year. But it also helped put some very dangerous people in prison. And it reminded me that being an entertainer doesn't excuse you from being a citizen." The performance was emotionally powerful and received a standing ovation that lasted nearly 10 minutes. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. Dean Martin's return to public life in late 1975 marked the beginning of a new phase in his career. But it also brought ongoing security concerns and industry challenges that would affect him for years to come. The entertainment industry's reaction to Dean's witness protection experience was mixed. Some colleagues and business associates praised his courage in testifying against organized crime, viewing his actions as a public service that had helped clean up corruption in Las Vegas. Frank Sinatra publicly supported Dean's decision, stating that any American who helps law enforcement put criminals in jail deserves respect and admiration. But other industry figures were uncomfortable with Dean's involvement in federal law enforcement operations. Several Las Vegas casino owners, even those with no criminal connections, were nervous about working with an entertainer who had cooperated with FBI investigations of the gambling industry. Some booking agents worried that hiring Dean might subject their own operations to federal scrutiny. Dean found that his market value as a performer had decreased significantly during his 6-month absence. Television networks were reluctant to book him for variety shows, partly because of security concerns and partly because of uncertainty about his commercial appeal after the witness protection experience. Record companies questioned whether his association with organized crime prosecutions might affect his marketability to mainstream audiences. Most significantly, Dean's relationship with Las Vegas was permanently changed. The city that had been the foundation of his success for over a decade was now a place where he faced ongoing security risks. Several casino owners who had not been implicated in the federal prosecutions nevertheless regarded Dean as a potential threat to their operations. Dean's performances in Las Vegas became infrequent and heavily guarded affairs. When he did appear in the city, federal marshals maintained discreet security and venues implemented enhanced screening procedures for audience members. The casual, intimate atmosphere that had characterized Dean's Las Vegas shows was replaced by a more formal, security-conscious environment. But Dean's experience in witness protection had also changed his perspective on his career and his responsibilities as a public figure. In interviews following his return, Dean spoke candidly about the lessons he had learned during his 6 months as Davidson. Living as an ordinary person for 6 months taught me things about myself that 25 years of fame couldn't teach me. Dean said in a 1976 interview with 60 Minutes, "I learned that my identity isn't just about being an entertainer. It's about being a citizen, a neighbor, and a human being who cares about justice and doing the right thing." Was it worth it? Asked interviewer Mike Wallace. Was testifying against organized crime worth losing 6 months of your career and putting your life at risk? Mike, if I hadn't testified, those criminals would still be operating, still be hurting people, still be corrupting legitimate businesses. My 6 months in hiding were nothing compared to the damage they would have continued to do. Do you regret getting involved? I regret that it was necessary. I regret that organized crime had infiltrated the entertainment industry to the extent that entertainers like me became unwitting witnesses to criminal activities. But I don't regret helping to prosecute them. Dean's witness protection experience became part of his public persona and his artistic identity. He began incorporating songs about justice, courage, and social responsibility into his performances. His concerts included discussions about the importance of citizens supporting law enforcement and standing up to corruption. Most importantly, Dean became an advocate for witness protection programs and judicial reform. He testified before congressional committees about the need for better protection of witnesses who cooperate with law enforcement investigations. He supported legislation to provide financial assistance to witnesses whose careers were damaged by their cooperation with federal prosecutions. The witness protection program saved my life, Dean told a Senate Judiciary Committee in 1977. But it also cost me 6 months of my career and permanently changed my relationship with the entertainment industry. We need to do better at protecting people who have the courage to testify against dangerous criminals. Dean's advocacy helped lead to improvements in federal witness protection procedures and increased funding for witness security programs. The legacy. The long-term impact of Dean Martin's witness protection experience extended far beyond his personal career and became part of a broader transformation in the relationship between the entertainment industry and law enforcement. Dean's testimony and his willingness to enter witness protection helped establish important precedents for how federal agencies investigate organized crime infiltration into legitimate businesses. The success of the prosecution against Vincent Castellano's organization demonstrated that even high-profile witnesses could be protected effectively, encouraging other entertainment industry figures to cooperate with similar investigations. Over the next decade, several other major entertainers provided testimony in federal organized crime prosecutions, citing Dean Martin's experience as evidence that witness protection could work. The entertainment industry itself began implementing more rigorous background checks and business practices designed to prevent criminal infiltration. The Las Vegas gaming industry in particular adopted enhanced oversight procedures that made it much more difficult for organized crime figures to operate through legitimate casinos. Dean's experience also influenced federal law enforcement policies regarding celebrity witnesses. The FBI developed specialized procedures for protecting high-profile individuals, whose cooperation was essential to major prosecutions, but whose fame made traditional witness protection methods challenging to implement. Most significantly, Dean's story became an example of how individual citizens could make a difference in the fight against organized crime. His willingness to sacrifice 6 months of his career to help prosecute dangerous criminals inspired other witnesses to come forward in federal investigations. Prosecutors began citing Dean's case as evidence that witness protection could work even in the most challenging circumstances. Dean continued to speak publicly about his experience for the rest of his career. In a 1985 interview, 10 years after his witness protection experience, Dean reflected on the long-term impact of his decision to testify against organized crime. People sometimes ask me if I would do it again, knowing what it cost me personally and professionally, Dean said. The answer is yes. Absolutely. Those 6 months when I disappeared from public view were the most important months of my career, because they were when I stopped being just an entertainer and became a citizen who took responsibility for protecting his community. What advice would you give to other people who witness criminal activity but are afraid to report it? I would tell them what I learned from my experience, that staying silent makes you complicit in the crimes you witness. If you see something wrong and you don't report it, you're part of the problem. Even if reporting it puts your career or your safety at risk, especially if reporting it puts your career at risk. Your career is just your job. It's not your character. And your character is determined by what you do when doing the right thing costs you something important. When Dean Martin died on Christmas Day 1995, his obituaries mention not only his contributions to entertainment, but also his role in federal organized crime prosecutions. The Las Vegas Review-Journal's obituary included this passage. Dean Martin will be remembered as one of the greatest entertainers of his generation, but his most courageous performance may have been his 6-month disappearance in 1975, when he entered federal witness protection after testifying against organized crime figures who had infiltrated the Las Vegas entertainment industry. At Dean's funeral, FBI Director Louis Freeh delivered a statement recognizing Dean's contribution to law enforcement. Dean Martin's willingness to testify against organized crime despite the personal and professional risks involved represents the highest ideals of American citizenship. His courage in entering witness protection and sacrificing 6 months of his career helped dismantle criminal enterprises that were harming legitimate businesses and innocent people. The witness protection safe house in Phoenix, where Dean had lived as David Davidson, was eventually converted into a training facility for federal marshals. A plaque in the facility reads, "In memory of the courage shown by witnesses who sacrificed their identities to protect their communities. Dedicated to Dean Martin, aka David Davidson, who proved that doing the right thing is worth any personal cost." Dean Martin's 6-month disappearance had become a symbol of the price that good citizens sometimes pay to uphold justice. Epilogue, the unbelievable truth. What happened to Dean Martin after he testified against the mob was unbelievable, not because it was too extraordinary to be true, but because it revealed how thoroughly organized crime had infiltrated American entertainment and how much courage it took for individual citizens to fight back. The unbelievable truth was that one of America's most beloved entertainers had been forced to disappear from public view for 6 months because he had the courage to tell the truth about criminal activities he had witnessed. The unbelievable truth was that the Witness Protection Program, designed to hide ordinary citizens who cooperated with law enforcement, had successfully concealed one of the most recognizable faces in America for half a year. The unbelievable truth was that Dean Martin's testimony helped dismantle criminal enterprises that had been operating with impunity for over a decade. But perhaps the most unbelievable truth was that Dean Martin's decision to sacrifice his career to help prosecute dangerous criminals established precedents that protected countless other witnesses and helped law enforcement agencies fight organized crime more effectively. Dean Martin disappeared for 6 months and emerged as more than an entertainer. He had become a symbol of what American citizenship could accomplish when individuals had the courage to do the right thing, regardless of personal cost. The end.